Hello and welcome to another episode of Tawdry Tablecast, where today I would like to talk about lore. Rather than talking about a particular game, I want to talk about the lore of a game, and today I want to talk about the lore of Warhammer 40,000, but particularly an area of the lore which I think has been fumbled pretty badly, and that is that of the Ynnari. Okay, so I'm going to go through what they are for those of you who might not know, the uninitiated.
Myself.
What exactly went wrong with the Ynnari and why I believe that happened and what could happen going forward. Okay, so first of all, what are the Ynnari? So the Ynnari in 40k are a particular branch of the Space Elves, also known as the Eldari. But before I can go into what they are, I feel it's important first that I give a bit of a historical context.
So are they Ynnari or Eldari or
both?
Is it the same?
They're both. No, it's different, but they're both. I'll explain more. So let's talk about the Eldari generally, historically. Okay, so in the lore of Warhammer 40,000, the Eldari were created, as well as the Orcs, by an ancient species known as the Old Ones to fight these dudes. Now, do you know who these are?
Iron Man?
We shouldn't say Terminators. No, they are Necrons. Well, at the time it was, I think, the Necrons here. But anyway, they fought against the Necrons and their kind of the Satan star gods. Which they won. The Necrons went to sleep. The Satan were shattered into many, many pieces after putting the Necrons in their metal bodies. And the Old Ones disappeared for insert reason here. Games Workshop have never said. That left the Eldari in control of the universe for about 60 million years. Okay. Now there's three things you've got to know about the Eldari at this point. One, they're all incredibly psychic. Every single one of them. Two, they have very strong emotions. And three, they live for a long, long time, just like elves in general fantasy. Okay, now why are those three facts important? Well, because in 40k there is something known as the warp, which is basically an extra dimension outside of the physical universe, which feeds on the emotions of everyone in the physical universe. And creates entities known as warp gods or chaos gods. Okay, so as the Eldari were reigning and living for those 60 million years, they started to get bored, because I guess who wouldn't in that scenario? They were able to create things with, simple thoughts, anything they wanted. They could create constructs to do everything for them. So they started to get bored and they started to go into more, perverse, hedonistic pleasures. Okay, whatever you can think of, I'm sure the Eldari were doing it. It was sex, drugs and rock and roll, 24/7, 365 days a year.
Feels like a bit filler, feels like it's a bit Hellraiser.
Yeah, a bit hell. To be fair, it was. But as they were doing all this, something was gestating in the warp, about to be born. And born it was when Slaanesh, the fourth chaos god, was born in a massive explosion. It created, right in the centre of the galaxy, created something called the Eye of Terror, which still exists in the lore to this day. It's a massive rift in the universe that goes into the warp. And it also killed about 95% of the Eldari at this point in time. Now, the ones who survived were then split into two specific factions. One are the Eldari, who basically realised bad stuff was about to go down. They didn't like the way the society was going, so they fled on various massive spaceships called craft worlds, and they decided to basically flee as far as they could from the centre of the galaxy, so they moved outwards. As the, Slaanesh was born, the big rift happened, and they survived that way. But we were also left with, some people call them the much cooler Eldari, the Drukhari. Now, they survived by being in what's known as the Webway, which is a separate kind of dimensional portal, which, or dimensional pocket, which can be used to travel between bits of the material universe. So they lived in there, and when Slaanesh was born, they were in there. However, neither side got away scot-free with
Their escape.
They both realised that Slaanesh still had a grip on their souls, and they had different ways of dealing with it. For the Ynnead, they were able to, when they died, were able to place their souls within things called spirit stones, which then get left in the craft worlds in a kind of like Matrix scenario. And in their lives, they basically led a very austere life, almost like monks, where they followed particular paths, and they would switch between them for the most part. Some people would stay in a particular path so that they never became too focused on any one emotion. Okay, or they never became too emotional, so they're very reserved and things like that. They'll never tend to get involved in things directly unless they have to. Whereas the Drukhari, they realised this was happening, but they said to themselves, we want to keep doing all of our Hellraiser shenanigans. They kept doing it, and they realised that as they were doing it, all of the pain and suffering from the people that they tortured acted as a buffer for their souls. So Slaanesh would instead feed on the suffering of others rather than on them. So that's how they survive. And if they die, they can also get cloned and things like that. They've also lost their psychic ability, just for kind of not using it, whereas the Ynnead have remained very psychically powerful.
Just from looking, it looks like the Ynnead get way too into their anime, and the Drukhari get way too into Mad Max. A little bit?
Kinda, yeah. Well, the Ynnead is kind of a lot focused on, kind of like kind of Eastern inspired aesthetics as well, whereas the Drukhari is much more kind of like drugs, rock and roll, Hellraiser,
Mad Max Fury Road,
fast hitting. So that's where the war for them kind of starts at the start of the 40th millennium. What's 40,000?
A millennium's 1,000 years, yeah.
Yeah, 40th millennium, and that's where they are. So they're kind of, the Ynnead are dying, the Drukhari are just kind of there, reaving and raiding across the galaxy, and Slaanesh is basically just waiting to get all of their souls. So it's a bad situation for both sides in various ways. However, there was a prophecy in the ancient Ynnead religion that when all the Ynnead died, there would be something called the Ranadandra, which is kind of like an apocalypse scenario where the god of the dead of the Ynnead, called Ynnead, would be born and then kill Slaanesh, or it'd be a massive big war. So they interpreted it to mean that. Now, some of both Ynnead and Drukhari began to believe that they could summon Ynnead early without all of them dying, which they tried to do in a ritual, which failed because of Space Marines. But the faction was born. Okay, so the Ynnari are a kind of mix of both, Ynnead and Drukhari. So in gameplay, it means that you can use certain units from both factions, as well as having a few unique characters, such as, this is Yvraine, this is the Vizark, there's also Ynnead, who is an avatar of Yvraine. No, not... Why did the Games Workshop do this? Ynnead, who is the Yncarne, who is an avatar of Ynnead, and Yvraine, who is the prophet of Ynnead.
I mean, I'm a fan of Y names. I'm one.
Yeah.
Like, it's the best kind of sounds.
It's the best kind of sounds, but Games Workshop make it very difficult sometimes when you're discussing lore. So in gameplay, you can take units from both, not all units, specific ones you're not allowed to take for whatever reason.
Because they're not as culty?
Not as culty, and Yvraine has to be your warlord, your kind of like leader unit, in order to have a Ynnari force. So that's in gameplay, but what about lore? So what are the Ynnari trying to do right now? So the ritual failed, and Ynnead was born, which is a kind of aspect or a avatar of... No, the Yncarne, the Yncarne was born, which is an avatar of Ynnead, but not the full thing.
I'm going to pause this here. I actually think you might be being cursed by some sort of chaos god.
It makes sense.
This is the third attempt, guys. The camera ran out of battery.
Yeah.
My phone went off. We're trying for a third time. This is the third time that he's gotten all of the names mixed up.
I blame Games Workshop a lot for this. Anyway, so
everything in his life is getting weird.
what are the Ynnari trying to do? So the Ynnari are trying to have Ynnead be fully born, okay? And the way they're trying to do this currently in the lore is that they are trying to collect what are called crone swords, which were bones of a god, Eldari god, which were made into swords. They currently have 4 out of 5. Okay, and they're trying to get the 5th one.
Didn't they make them?
No, they were made by one of the Eldari, smith god, Vol.
Okay, why did they only give them 4?
Well, no, he didn't give... They just ended up all over the place.
Alright, so they found 4.
They found 4. There's one they haven't found, basically. So there was a trilogy of books, because what happened was the Ynnari began to become...
United again?
No, they began to become unveiled in 40k with just a few units like Yvraine and the Berserk and Ynnead, and they slowly started using them within plot elements, such as the resurrection of Rabuti Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, and there started to be some pushback from people in the 40k community because of, just what they saw as an attempt to try and merge kind of the Eldari and Drukhari factions into one, and also potentially removing Slaanesh from the war by having Ynnead kill Slaanesh. So it was a bit of a pushback given what was happening with Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar. And basically what happened was the Ynnari were put kind of on ice in a holding pattern, okay, because there was what was meant to be a trilogy of books detailing what was happening with the Ynnari and the hunt for the crone swords. So let's ask you, Yvette, who knows nothing about the lore. You
already told me they're elves, so
yes,
that.
They are space elves, okay, but they have 4 out of the 5 crone swords, right? Okay, they need 1 more. Where would you put the last one so that they couldn't get it? Knowing what I've told you about these factions...
Well, in that warpy thing, so it's not really there?
Yes, but with whom?
Well, the bad guy? Slaanesh.
Yes. Ding, ding, ding. You two could work for the Black Library. In their infinite wisdom, they decided to say that the last crone sword was with Slaanesh. They just outright said it, factually. And then that was it. They were kind of left unable to get it because obviously no Eldari Drukhari can go near Slaanesh without their souls just being consumed completely.
So that last sword is the middle finger.
Yes.
And it's 2 fans.
And it's 2 fans of the Ynnari.
That's... Well, but then you're kind of stunting yourself.
Yes, which is a point. So, why might Games Workshop have done this? Well, I've talked about the pressure that they were getting from some fans because of the perceived attempt to merge 2 distinct factions into one, because it did happen in the end times for Warhammer Fantasy, as well as removing Slaanesh. Now, there could be arguments that this was the case. I don't know. This is obviously not factual. But it does mean now that we do have a sub-faction that just exists, but also has nothing really to do.
I mean, that's what you're currently building army-wise, so I'm kind of feeling like you're a bit of an edgelord here, aren't you?
Well, a bit. So unfortunately, if you were a fan of the initial idea of the Ynnari of being a new narrative progression for both the Eldari and Drukhari, because before this, both of these factions weren't able to do much because Games Workshop have this idea of a faction has one facet, has one kind of narrative stake.
One key trait,
which for the Eldari is that they are a dying race, which for them means that, they can never really succeed, and even when they do, it's a Pyrrhic victory. The Avatar of Cain, you know how the unit I've shown you, the cool looking one.
Did I not paint that for you?
No, I don't even have it. But
what
anyway,
did I paint?
I can't remember. But that's that gets like dunked on, even though it's meant to be, like a shard of like the god of war for the Eldari, and so many hilarious stories. Whereas the Drukhari just don't really tend to show up much. And both Eldari and Drukhari have models which are so old, they could vote, they could drink, they could, I think Eldari have ones that are 30 years old, and a lot of the range for Drukhari just don't exist at all.
As someone in their 30s, I'm feeling insulted that you're calling me old.
So the Drukhari, both the Ynnari, could have offered an opportunity for progression, but it maybe would have meant that both had been merged. So I'm going to give a bit of a hot take here and say that might have been the best idea. Because it would have been rough for people who have collected either of these factions, but in terms of production, Games Workshop have made it clear that there's going to be no quick refresh for either of these factions. They do get refreshed units, every now and again, but it will be decades before you get a full refresh for especially the Drukhari, because there's so much that's missing, if it will happen at all. Because we've had the Leagues of Votann, you've always got new units coming out for different factions, you've got the refreshes for the Tyranids and the Necrons, and obviously Games Workshop are struggling to get production for everything right now. They are trying to obviously increase how many factories they have, but there is obviously a limit to how much they can produce.
I mean, we had such a hassle getting Yvraine. Like, we went to Warhammer World, we did that.
We went to every
shop in Nottingham.
Everytime Glasgow. And only could get the Vizark. It just was a total pain.
Good trip though.
It was a good trip. But absolutely. It is a sort of, both in terms of the lore and actual real world production, it may have been beneficial to rip the plaster off and say you can still play these and kind of it's on table, but we're going to do something new and we're going to create new units. People might disagree with me because there are obviously these lovely combat patrols, but unless, particularly for Drukhari, unless you're going to 3D print or to proxy, there's a lot you simply cannot get in terms of the overall forces, and somewhat, Eldari, you're just going to go for really old units, or old sculpts.
It seems cool though.
But what could have happened? What could have the Ynnari had done instead? We'll never know. Obviously,
I mean, they've got spaceships. They could have went and shot Slaanesh.
I mean, it's not really how it works.
This is why I stick to just painting
this is why you
my fishmen.
But the question is, what will be going on with the Ynnari going forward, given what we know from the aborted trilogy of books, from the lore, and I would say, for anyone who is interested, is I would be very, very concerned and hesitant. I don't think Games Workshop are ever going to progress them in any meaningful way. I think it will just be seen as a kind of accident that kind of happened, and therefore won't even know I bought into the idea of a bunch of Eldari Drukhari who realised that they were going to die anyway and decided to take matters into their own hands and become kind of like either dead or undead, cult. Could have been really cool. Unfortunately, it never happened, and we're left at a kind of narrative kind of impasse. So that's what happens with the Ynnari. Unfortunately, these things do occur. I do hope we will get something a bit more positive, but unfortunately, with Games Workshop, the way they tend to work, I don't think that's going to happen.
I think you just need to start writing your own weird little fanfics.
Yeah, I'll just send complete
If anyone
letters.
else wants to send weird little fanfics,
So what,
Please
you
do.
know, if for anyone else who either knows about Ynnari or plays Ynnari or has the models
Or writes weird fanfics.
what do you think was the big issue with them? How would you have fixed it? What do you think is going to happen going forward? Because I'm always happy to discuss.
I imagine it was just kind of annoying trying to like sculpt those hats. Like that seems like effort.
I mean, that seems to always be the case with.
I've never liked sculpting, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's impressive. I like the crown.
But thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something in my inane ramblings about a sub-faction of two different factions. Most likely not, but...
I mean, I learned Slanesh's name.
That's good.
What's the one I like? Because I like the colour blue.
Zinch. You like Zinch.
Go Zinch.
Okay. Thank you and have a good day.
Bye.